Hi guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well. You guys are gonna hear Lola bark for a couple seconds, and one of my kids just got home, so you'll hear it. I hope you guys are all doing well and that everything has gone good for you in the past week. I hope you're out there enjoying the no snow. At least there isn't any here for now. And I hope that you guys have just been doing well. If you're new to this channel, like I said, my name's Crystal. I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. From time to time, I do international crimes as well. Probably coming up soon. I know we just did Lord Lucan, but there was a little bit of a Canadian connection. I'm just not sure which case. I've got a couple cases that I'm thinking of doing next week. I'm not quite sure which one I'm going to do now. And one of them is going to be a revision of a case that I've done before. I really hated. Okay, it's the first case I ever did. I really hated that video, so I'm going to try to redo it. Sorry guys. Sometime in the near future, and we're still waiting for an update on Greg Furtuck, so that's going to take a while. So hopefully you guys will hit the like button. Hopefully you'll subscribe, hit the notification bell. That might work, might not. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. And let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you guys are going to comment though, please no hate. There's enough hate out there in the world. We're just here to talk. And I hope you do leave me some comments. You know, I'm going to say particularly about this case. The reason I chose it is because I was always going to do this case. It's one of the few that remain on my mind, but also because there's been new developments in it. You guys know I love that. So hopefully that sounds like something you guys want to get behind. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys watch me and choose to watch me. It makes me feel very, very good. So thank you guys. So today's case, like I said, when we talked about it last week, it's a bit of a historical one. And I know sometimes that frightens you guys off, but I hope it won't, because this case is very infamous. Let's just say. Today we're talking about the Canadian Babes in the Woods case, the Stanley Park Babes in the Woods case. There is one similar to it in the States, but this is the Babes in the Woods case. And our story actually takes place January 14th of 1953. Groundskeeper for Stanley Park, which is in Vancouver, just in case you guys don't know. It's actually, I believe, at the northeast corner of Stanley Park, but we'll get into it. We are going to talk a little bit about Stanley Park. So this is Vancouver, British Columbia. And he was just a grounds worker doing his work. Some reports actually say that he was a Stanley Park employee, some just a groundskeeper. Never did get a name, guys, so I'm not even sure what his name is. He was just doing his work. And this would be probably in a more remote, maybe less accessible place. It doesn't seem like this at this point in time was heavily traversed, or maybe it was just this one particular area. And this would be close to the Beaver Lake area of Stanley Park. He walked over some foliage, just normal stuff, right? You guys know, if you're in Canada, probably everywhere else too, lots of leaves on the ground. And in Vancouver, they get a lot of rain, but not so much snow. So it does make sense. And he heard the leaves make a very strange cracking sound. Not like normal, hey, I'm walking along in the foliage, I can hear the leaves crack. Nothing like that. These weren't fresh leaves or anything of that nature. And so he decided he was going to look underneath and see what was making this bizarre sound. He had to dig through the foliage, the leaves that were on top, and when he got underneath, he found bones embedded in the soil. They were also covered with a layer of dirt, so he dug quite a bit. And of course, from there, he immediately called investigators, and investigators came the next day and cordoned off the scene. They were located, so we're going to call them they. You guys already know it's called Babes in the Woods. So the bones were located not just underneath years of leaf debris, but also soil and what they call a, quote, decomposing woman's fur coat, end quote. You will read some articles where it says that this coat was either a cloak or a raincoat, but I am more likely to believe that this was an actual woman's fur coat. They brought along a doctor with them. Now, once again, some of the reports are going to say that this doctor was a pathologist. He was not. One of the detectives that's very much attached to this case, Detective Honeyborn, we're going to be talking about him too, but he, I would say, probably has the most information on this case, and he said that the doctor involved in this was just a medical doctor, not a pathologist. I know sometimes people would think that that doesn't matter, but pathologists go to school for longer and have specialized training, more so than what a regular MD would have. They're more prone to checking out diseases in bones or looking at biopsies, things of that nature, to find the actual pathogen that's harming a person. So a forensic pathologist at that point in time didn't even exist, really, guys. They did, but they didn't, not in the capacity that we know them. They're involved in dead bodies and trying to figure out what the cause of death is. They would be more involved with autopsies, things of that nature. Actual medical doctors often sit in on autopsies, but they're not able to perform them, so to speak. This was just a regular doctor. However, 1953, guys, makes sense. We did not have the technology or the access to things like a botanist that could actually date the leaves, or like a paleontologist, really, that could, I think they're more anthropologists, let's just say, that could date the bones. The force just didn't have access to that, and they probably didn't have the funding either. And you guys already know how I feel about the VPD, but this is one of the few times where I'm not angry with them. This was not a bad investigation. There just wasn't a lot to investigate. So when they unearthed the bones, they found that there were two sets of them. Identification for these bones was very hard anyway. We're talking about 1953, so no forensics. People didn't even really use gloves at that point in time. There was fingerprinting. However, these were just bones. There was no flesh attached to them, nothing like that. So it made identifying these bodies hard, but what made it even harder was the fact that prepubescent children are very hard to identify because they're similar in structure. If they were older teens, 15 and above, it would be slightly easier. If they were women who had given birth, it would be even more easy to tell that they were women because they'd have notches in the pelvis, right? It's just one of those things you pick up, notches in the pelvis, to indicate how many births they had. I didn't know this for many years, probably, okay, then I'd have to reveal my age, but it was only a few years ago, let's just say, that I found out that notches in the pelvis, there will be a notch every time you have a baby. But they didn't have anything like that. They had these small bodies, and these were very small. The doctor determined at that point in time, because it was very difficult, like I said before, to make an identification, that this was the body of a girl and a boy. And one of the bodies was between 7 to 9 years old, thereabouts. The other body was assumed to be anywhere from 5 to 7 years old. So they were dealing with very young children. At this point in time, they were able to get some things from the crime scene itself. Now, this is not an active crime scene, guys, because the pathologist, or the doctor involved, and investigators counted basically the layers of leaves and dirt and were able to ascertain that these bodies had more than likely been there since 1947. Some reports say 47, 48. So they were already dealing with bodies that had been in the ground for 6 years. This is no way an active crime scene. There was very little evidence to go on, but they did have a little bit. They had the decomposing woman's fur coat. They also had decomposing children's clothing in the area as well. The clothing that was left behind suggested that the individuals were male. However, at that point in time, especially because the clothing was judged to be from working class families, that's what they would have called them, lower income families, it wasn't uncommon, it's still not uncommon today, for children to share clothes, right? Hand-me-downs. So a brother might give hand-me-downs to his sister, etc. That's probably what they were going on. They also found 2 aviator style caps, not one. You will read only one, but there were actually 2. These resemble the caps that airplane pilots used to wear in the war. It may be even before World War II. Okay, you guys, I'm sure you guys have seen A Christmas Story. I believe it's Flick. Is it Flick that wears the aviator style cap? That's the similar type of cap that we're talking about. They were able to find 2. There was also a lunchbox there, a woman's size 7.5 penny loafer shoe, and the bones themselves. Oh, and a hatchet. Now, when they were autopsying the boys, when they were autopsying the bones, they were able to tell, yes, definitely, that these children were murdered, and they felt that the hatchet was the more than likely the murder weapon. I believe in a lot of instances they said that the heads were, quote, smashed in. So I don't even know how much of the face was left, but they said there was definitely obvious signs that these children had been bludgeoned. The bodies, when they were found, were in also a strange position, if you will. It's strange to me how someone would be able to get 2 children who would be active at that point in time to succumb to this. It's very strange to me. It'll make sense when we talk about it later. It's very strange to me how one person could control these 2 kids or make them stay put, so to speak, while they were being murdered. You know, one would have to be murdered before the other one that way. How come the other kid didn't run? Regardless, their bodies were found lying in a straight line, obviously covered with the decomposing coat. I should say their bones were found laying in a straight line. One body was this way with its feet pointing like that. The other body's head was here and its feet were pointing together. So you had their feet almost touching and they were in a straight line. No one knew what to do at this point in time other than to comb through reports, right, guys? That's the first thing you do. Comb through missing persons reports, see if there was any 2 children that would match the description of these 2 children, what little they had, from 1947. They also were looking into school records to see if any kids had abruptly stopped going to school for this age range at this period of time in 1947. And of course the investigators didn't come up with anything. So they started looking into the hatchet more. Yeah, that's right. I researched the hatchet a little bit. There's hatchets. There's different kinds of hatchets for everything, guys. Like a wood, you know, the little ones where you cut off twigs and stuff like that, or you take camping with you, would be very different from this. This was a workman's hatchet. It was basically used to make wooden shingles. Wooden shingles are still made at this point in time, and they would have been made in Vancouver at that point in time. They were used to, I guess they're more durable. There you go. They were used to make specific wooden shingles. So the hatchet itself is called a shingler, and the shingles made from it are actually called shakes. You guys have heard of this before, cedar shake shingles. Okay, it makes sense. And they are generally made from the western redwood tree. At this point in time, the Pacific Northwest in the US was the predominant maker of this type of shingle, but it was also produced in Vancouver. So therefore, anybody working in Vancouver for any of the companies that produce them could have been any one of those who this belonged to. This tree, though, this Western red cedar tree is also located in Stanley Park. That's why I'm bringing this up. It's possible that this hatchet could have also been used for fixing the interior of a home. Basically, little pieces, it carves off little pieces of cedar, probably once again, so that people can make ceilings, little joints and ceilings and walls so that they can attach together in the interior of a home. It would have been used for that as well. And those are called laths, 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 not to be confused with a lathe. So officials believed, of course, that the hatchet was the object used to bludgeon the children. I don't know if they ever located any blood on it. I don't know anything like that. However, 6 years of rain would wash away evidence for sure. So like I said, the clothing found around the kids was decomposed, but suggestive to being 2 boys, particularly the aviator caps too. However, from the fact that the doctor said that these were a boy and a girl, that was kind of overlooked. So at this point in time, investigators couldn't find anything in missing persons reports, couldn't find anything in school records, so they appealed to the public. And they asked the public to come forward and let them know if they had seen a woman and 2 children entering Stanley Park in 1947. This generated a lot of tips. However, Stanley Park is a very well-known tourist attraction, and it attracts like millions of people every year. Even back then, it would have attracted quite a few people, guys. So a lot of the reports coming in were basically a mom taking her 2 kids for a fun day at the park. That's all they wanted to get across at that point in time. And of course, tips did come up. They were looked into. They were all exhausted. Nothing came out of it. Nothing at all. There was a placard with the bones, and we're going to get into that later on, that said that the police, probably a few years after the original investigation, when they were still looking for information, it would probably be a few years later, police said they felt that these 2 bodies, yeah, you guys already know the surprise. Police felt that these 2 bodies more than likely liked to play war games. It was 1947, so of course the war had, just ended like a year and a half before, maybe 2 years before, where they assumed that these bodies were killed. Yeah, I keep giving it away. I'm sorry, guys. I really am. They assumed that they liked playing war games like most kids at that point in time. They also assumed that their father had probably fought in the war and had either just recently come home or had been a casualty of war, like so many other people. That's probably where they assumed the aviator style caps had come from. They also figured from the clothing involved that they were working class. They were part of a working class family. They felt that the mother had more than likely worked during the war and was able to support her kids at this point in time. But after the war, she more than likely lost her job by the because of the returning soldiers. They even at that point in time had an inkling, due to the fact that the boys were covered with the fur coat, a seeming sign of compassion, and the fact that there was the woman's size 7.5 penny loafer found. They believed these boys were more than likely killed by their mother. They believed that then and through the years. We'll get into it. With nothing else to go on, really, the evidence was then gathered. And when I say gathered, there's reports that it might have just been jumbled together and thrown, but gathered together, the bones and the actual evidence together, and put into 2 cardboard boxes. Once again, investigators cannot be faulted for this. This is the way things were done back then. This was the protocol. This is what they knew how to do. So they put them in these 2 boxes. And at this point in time, the boxes began one of their many journeys. They showed up at various places, let's just say, guys. One of which was the PNE, the Pacific, I want to say it right, the Pacific National Exhibition. So kind of like the CNE in Toronto. The bones actually showed up there and were on exhibit at one point in time. One box of the bones was eventually located at the VPD. The other one was at a location associated with the VPD. It is the VPD, Vancouver Police Department's museum. And this is a place where they showcase evidence, I guess, and pictures and stuff like that from Vancouver's most infamous crimes. Most heavily talked about, most infamous crimes. They were put on display there. So you have bones and evidence, and we're talking about a jumble. It sounds like it wasn't just one box containing the bones, one box containing the evidence. It sounds like they were intermixed between the two. If you guys just give me 1 second, I'll try to pull up a picture of what they had done. And it sat like that. This became Vancouver's most infamous cold case. People looked into it. There were many detectives that looked into it from time to time, and everybody was very much affected by it because these are kids. They're kids. So this right here that I'm showing you, oh God, I really hope you can see it, as well as the sculptures above, that's what facial recognition had gone to. When it was thought that the bodies were both a boy and a girl. And this little picture is how the bodies were arranged in that museum in the VPD. I have issues with it. We'll get into that later too. Like, bones are cursed. They're murder bones. Sorry. And also it's just very disrespectful. Very disrespectful. But they were shown there. If I had a chance to go to a museum, a crime museum, I would more than likely go. I'm not put off by seeing crime scene photos. I really wish I wasn't so desensitized. I'm sorry, guys, but dealing with this information for as long as I have, you do get desensitized. However, it's sacrilegious to me to have the bones of murder victims on show. I guess we technically do that sometimes with mummies, but if it's not archaeological in any way, or not paleontological, of course, I want to see dinosaur bones and stuff like that. If it's not like that and it's from more recent history, and this was 1953, guys, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. Do you know what I mean? It's well past the age for being deemed ancient, or it's well, how do I want to say it? It's more new. It's in no way an ancient case. So no, you're not studying these bones from an anthropological point of view. These bones are put there, and it makes these victims no longer real human beings that were horribly murdered, real children human beings that were horribly murdered. It makes them no longer humans, but more just specimens or something for people to gawk at. And that really bothers me. It bothers a lot of people. So it's very disrespectful to me to do that. Plus, the bones are probably cursed. They were murder bones. I can't. So like I said, they traveled around for quite a lot of years. So Stanley Park, guys, we haven't talked about it before. It's a really large park. Actually, it's about 400 hectares worth of park. And it's very well known for its abundant wildlife, its historic trees, its waterways. You can see the mountains from there, extensive biking trails, extensive walking trails. It's very well known. It's actually, I should say that Central Park in New York is about 1/5 of the size that Stanley Park is. And it is Vancouver's first urban park. It was the first one ever opened in Vancouver. It also is home to Vancouver's seawall, which I guess is a big tourist draw as well. So it takes approximately 2 hours to actually walk around the loop of the park, and that's just the trail that they've made, and about an hour to bike around it. And it's well used. It's well known for its biking trails and walking trails. A lot of people, I guess, go to do this. And it's situated on the peninsula, of course. And it's about, like I said, at the northwest edge of downtown Vancouver. So it's right in Vancouver. It's visited now by millions of people every year. So more than likely at that point in time, there were hundreds of thousands of people that came and visited. That's why I said it was, I mean, they were trying to exhaust every lead. You could definitely see, and you could definitely see where there would be a lot of tips, but none that really were what investigators needed. It was actually designated a historical site in 1988. So there you go, guys, if you want to know a little bit about Stanley Park. It's very heavily visited by people. And like I said before, the case was looked into many times in the years that passed, but nothing new came out of it until a man named Detective Brian Honeyborn, who at this point in time was head of the Provincial Unsolved Homicide Unit, inherited the case. And this would be in the mid-90s. He inherited the case and he wanted to reopen the case. This case affected him a lot, guys. I think he had studied it before as well. And he definitely wanted to reopen the case because so much had changed technologically wise, particularly the advent of DNA. He also wanted to look at the evidence and see if there was anything that they could draw conclusions from now with that and just re-examine the case on a whole. He also wanted the bodies re-examined just to see if they could get DNA from them, number one, and if any other inferences could be made. His first job, if you will, was to actually locate the bodies, though. Like I said, there was a box of things in storage at the VPD, but he actually had to go to the museum and get the other bones, the ones that were on display that I just showed you. They may have made models of them at this point in time, but at that point in time, they were the bones. And he was able to get them. He actually did it without his superiors knowing because he, much like myself, and much like a lot of people I know, found it really disrespectful that these were just shown in a museum. So he brought them back to the VPD. And in 1996, they were handed off, end of 95, started 96, they were handed off to a doctor at the University of British Columbia. His name is Dr. David Sweet, to examine. And Dr. Sweet was able to get some DNA from one of the skulls, one of the fragments of bones. You have to remember they're probably the skulls were in fragments too. I know it didn't really look that way, but you could see it almost looked like the jawbone may have been missing, but I think it was more the back of the head that was damaged. Regardless, he was able to get DNA from these bones. And when they tested it, of course, you guys probably already figured it out, it was found that the two bodies were not a boy and a girl, but two boys. So the original doctor being wrong really bungled the original investigation. Of course, like I said, it was very hard back then, so I'm not trying to discount this doctor. He wasn't trained in that anyway, but it was so very long ago. I'm sure he did his best, but because they were misidentified like that, missing persons reports, school records, etc., that were about two boys, nobody would be looking into. That's why I'm saying it. It was also discovered at this point in time that the bodies were actually brothers, not full brothers. They were half brothers. They shared the same mother, but not the same fathers. Age ranges were still in the approximate, they said between 6 and 10. Both bodies were between 6 and 10 years old. Of course, this is a huge news and it's going to generate tips. This is very exciting, and it did. Before this, I'm sure the public thought about this case, particularly people that had been alive back then, right? It's only in the 90s. It was like 40-some years later. So you know what I mean? People are still alive. And it's generating tips, but this goes one step further and people have been thinking about it. So of course, a lot of tips came in, and Honeyborn himself, Detective Honeyborn himself, definitely had a lot of stuff to look into, and some of it was very promising. However, they also revealed at that point in time that any of the evidence that had come with the bones was too deteriorated to use. The reason being is because they were stored in these, number one, the bones had been handled by a lot of people at this point in time. And in 1953, they didn't necessarily wear gloves, but also the staff at the museum may not have been. So their DNA would, of course, be transferred. The DNA they took, I believe, I think they must have gone and penetrated the bones on the inside so they could get it, so to speak. It was difficult, but they were able to do it. But it also complicated things because acid erosion happens with just cardboard box. These were simple cardboard boxes, guys. Nothing was bagged, nothing was tagged. These are things we would do now, the practices we would do now, wear gloves. And if you're looking at different specimens, you change your gloves every time. Every time you handle a bone, you change your gloves. We know this because you don't want to contaminate anything. They're stored in bags, individually marked, individually tagged, and then put in certain types of boxes where acid erosion can't occur, because the acid erosion, of course, can destroy evidence. And that's exactly what happened in this case. None of the other evidence, aside from the bones themselves, were usable. So like I said, Detective Honeyborn had a few things to look into at this point in time. One of them was a woman seen with two boys who stayed at a place called the New Haven Hotel and then just mysteriously disappeared. This was from 1947. Another one was a woman from Mission, BC, who had been hitchhiking to Stanley Park and had two boys with her that were both wearing aviator-style caps. Another one was a woman who was thought to be a prostitute. I don't like it when they say that, but was thought to be a prostitute, sex worker. I'm sorry, guys, they said prostitute in the original articles, but we should say sex worker, who lived with her father and two small boys by a lighthouse at Prospect Point in Stanley Park. They wondered if it was her. And another promising lead, this was really promising, was a woman and a man together, okay, seen with two kids and a hatchet going into Stanley Park. The woman herself was seen going into the woods with the two boys, and then just coming out herself. Or I'm sorry, all four of them were seen going into the woods in Stanley Park, and then just the man and the woman came out a short time later, or however long later. It was also reported that the woman had, quote, blood all over her legs, end quote, when she came out of the woods. So these leads seem really promising, right? Really exciting. Don't get too excited, guys. They were all a bust. It was either that the ages didn't match up, the dates didn't match up, or that they actually found the people they were talking about alive and well. So nothing panned out from these leads. At this point in time, Detective Honeyborn decided to do the right thing and give these boys a proper burial. Now, he did keep the skulls, or at least fragments of the skulls, for future testing, just in case, but the majority of the rest were cremated, and then the ashes were spread at the ocean. And there was an actual chaplain, a police chaplain on board, and he gave a service for them as well, so that not only did they have a final resting place together, but they also had a burial ceremony. So with all leads exhausted, Detective Honeyborn, of course, had to move on to other cases as well, but he always remained interested in this case. He still talks about this case to this day. He is since retired, but he is still active in this case, just not from an active, I'm using active twice, not from an active, ongoing look into it. This is just kind of like what we do, except he has access to the case files. He is a trained detective, things of that nature. He still speaks about this, like I said. I think he gives lectures on it. He still has an interest in the case. He's still all of that stuff, and he's still alive today. The case went cold once again. People are still trying to find out who these boys are, but of course, the case went cold. They have better better information to go on, but it's still not producing anything. Then comes 2018. And at this point in time, you guys know genetic genealogy. I would say more likely because of the case of the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, and how he was discovered. Detectives, new detectives, wanted to see if they could somehow find out the boy's identification and possibly the ID of the person that murdered them using genetic genealogy. This was a lot harder than what people would think, though, guys, because number one, they can't test any of the evidence in the cardboard box, right? We already know that that's been destroyed. But the bones themselves, remember, they've been handled by a lot of different people. So you have to extract it in a certain way. And at this point in time, the skulls are very fragile as well. It was a very hard process. It was complicated by a lot of different things. So it took them a few years to be able to find someone who could do so. And it was at Lakehead University right here in Thunder Bay, Ontario, guys. In Thunder Bay, Ontario, Lakehead University was able to extract DNA from the tooth of the older boy. It seems like the tooth of the older boy, and was able to send it off. That would have been about 2021, it seems. So like I said, they really wanted to do it, but it took them quite a while to be able to do it. And plus, you know, sometimes when there's other cases, those cases will take precedence. But regardless, by 2021, it was uploaded into GEDmatch, and we'll get into a little bit of the GEDmatch stuff in a bit. So they just had to wait and hope that either a family member had already put something in or would soon put something in. So now we're going to change tactics. A woman named Allie Brady, this is a pseudonym, guys, was looking through pictures in a family album one day. And I'm sure you guys have done it too. I've done it millions of times. My nanny used to have this old black and white album that had pictures of our ancestors, the black and white pictures and everything. And of course, we'd sit there and go through them. And I'd say, Nanny, who's this person? Blah, blah, blah. This is exactly what Allie was doing. She came across two pictures, one of a little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. The other one was described as having dark features, so I guess he probably had like brown eyes and brown hair. And she asked her grandma, Diane, who these boys were. And her grandma said, these are your great uncles. These are my brothers. One was named Derek. He was older. And the younger boy's name was David. Their last name was allegedly, at the time, Bousquet. Bousquet. Now, Diane said that Derek was born in 1940 and that David was born in 1941. She herself was born in 1937, so she is their older sister. Diane said she never knew her own father or the fathers of either of the boys, but their mother's name was Eileen. She said that they grew up in abject poverty. She could remember stories like, in order to get out of having to pay rent, because they didn't have the money to do so, they would actually jump out of windows of the home so that they didn't have to pay rent. They didn't have the money for it. She talked about things like that. They were very, very poor. Eileen was actually originally from Alberta, BC. Alberta. Sorry, I don't know why I said it that way. She was originally from Alberta, but at some point, came to BC. The kids were all born there, as far as anybody knows. And they lived their lives in BC, including Diane, who still lives in BC. She said that she was told one day that her brothers were taken into care because her mother was too poor to take care of them. And that was that. Eileen, she did say, because she didn't know her own father or the two boys' fathers, it appears she never had any support help or any help at all from their fathers. I mean, it must have been very, very difficult in the 40s for a single mother with 3 children, especially one that does not seem to have ever been married. And we'll go into that in a little bit. To have 3 children dependent on her, especially one who was as poor as what Eileen was. And it does make some sense, because if she was able to support her children through the war, the boys were born in 40 and 41, she may have gotten super desperate after the war ended and the soldiers came home and she lost her job. If they were poor in the 40s, it would have been the early 40s. It would have been compounded even more so after the end of the war. Eileen is also described as being Métis. So that could be why David had darker features. I may be mixing the two up. However, it was also noted that investigators believed, at some point in time, they were able to look into it, that these boys' distant relatives had been immigrants from Russia. Their descendants had been immigrants, that they were descendants from Russian immigrants that had more than likely come to the area at the turn of the century, and that the family had later changed its name from whatever it had been to Bosquet. But this was done in the 50s, after the boys were already dead. I know it's really confusing, because why have that last name for 50 years and then suddenly alter it? Maybe it made getting a job better. However, Eileen was known to use several different last names, including Bosquet and also Dalton, D'Alton, and several others. There is no indication that there was ever a marriage certificate issued to her, I think, at all, but definitely none with regards to either of those last names. She was known to use different last names. Like I said before, they thought that the boys were descendants of Russian immigrants, and this is very odd, but they were very certain that the boys had a relative who lived close to the entrance of Stanley Park. Maybe it was an area that a lot of Russian nationals emigrated to before they became Canadian citizens. Maybe that was why. I guess it would probably make sense as to why one of the boys had really light colored hair and eyes too, because of their Russian descent. Allie was really intrigued, of course, by this information. Who wouldn't be, to unknown uncles? And she tried to press Diane for more information, to which Diane replied, quote, "We don't talk about that," end quote, and quote, "That's in the past," end quote. So Allie decided she was going to search for her uncles on her own, using websites like Ancestry, 23andMe, My Heritage, sites like that. She decided to do that. So in 2020, she spit in the tube and sent it away. But they also tested Diane's DNA. She, at that point in time, was suffering pretty heavily from dementia. Unfortunately, she had dementia. So that makes her memory even, I don't want to call it more faulty, because I know a lot of dementia patients live in the past, but they mix up dates and times and possible names. That's why I'm saying the case was further complicated by Diane's memories maybe not being so concrete. We're also talking about the fact that if the boys were murdered in 1947, Diane was only 10 as well. So I'm just saying. But regardless, they were able to, Allie's mother, who's never named, guys, sorry, was able to swab her mother and send the results away and upload it into all of these various sites. In February of 2022, so just this year, Allie's mother got a phone call from the detective saying that her DNA, the DNA that was sent in, was a match to the 2 bodies from the infamous Babes in the Woods case. These boys finally had a name. On February 15th of 2022, detectives announced, and it was a detective named Detective Rodriguez, announced that the boys were, I want to get their actual birth date, guys. Sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. So the older boy was Derek, and he was born, I believe it was in February of 1940. I'm sorry, guys. I know I have it written down. Regardless. It was known that the boys, as well as Diane, had all attended Hudson School. Here we go. Sorry. Derek was the older boy. He was the one that had dark features, and he was born February 27th of 1940, so it was February. David was the one with blonde hair and blue eyes, and he was born June 24th of 1941, and they all attended a school in, I believe it was Hudson. Sorry, Henry Hudson Elementary School, and this was in Kitsilano. You see, that's the school the boys attended for as long as they were able to go to school. Could be why the lunchbox was there, right? Maybe they shared a lunchbox. Definitely, Derek was 7 when this occurred, and definitely David was 6, so very young. Allie and the rest of the family, I guess, apparently was very shocked by this information because the woman they knew, Eileen, was a very non-violent person. She did not agree with violence whatsoever, and everybody describes her that way. So it's very surprising to them that she would have been involved in this. She actually died at the age of 78 in 1996. Her family is really having a hard time at this point in time. That's probably why they use pseudonyms too. They don't want to be identified, so to speak, because they said they had a hard time believing, quote, a woman of her nature could kill her own sons, end quotes. So detectives, though, did decide to see if there was any record of the boys going into care, right? That was the story she told all of the extended family members. That was the story she told her own daughter, everybody. That was the story she told them. So they did look into records just in case these boys, like I said, had been taken into care and were murdered by someone else, and maybe she never knew. There is absolutely no record whatsoever that either of these boys entered into care under either last name. So police were able to announce once again that the boys had been identified, although they've also said that they don't believe there will ever be an arrest in this case. Well, Eileen's dead. She's been dead since 1996. However, you know the rule, guys. They cannot name, remember Gerald Thomas Archer? We talked about this in that case. They cannot name a suspect who is deceased as a killer until 30 years after they died. I don't know why. It seems very strange because that person's already dead, so why not? But maybe giving family time, I'm not sure. So they'll just give you a little hints around it. Remember in the case of Gerald Thomas Archer, they said he was found guilty of murdering a woman in 1971 in southwestern Ontario, and they believed he died in, what was it, 1995? Whatever. They believed he died in the 90s without revealing who he was. So in this case, they said that they believed An arrest will never be made because, quote, the person who killed Derek and David was likely a close relative who died approximately 25 years ago, end quote. So that's kind of how we know. They never released Eileen's name. That was dug up by a local crime reporter in BC named Eve Lazarus. She was actually the one who interviewed Ali Brady on this case. So that's how she knows who the person is. That's how she knows Eileen's name. You pretty much can draw the conclusion it was her mother. There you go. As of today, the case is still open, guys. It has to be considered that way because they still can't name the mother, even though we know who it is. And it's still considered active because they don't have a suspect. An arrest will likely never be made. But it's very big news to us that we actually have faces to put to these boys and identification, right? That's the best we could hope for. This reminds me a lot of The Boy in the Box. That case haunts me too, from the States. He was 4 and badly beaten and found in the box, and they still to this day haven't identified him. I really do hope that genetic genealogy can someday identify who he is. I'm just going to see if they've actually got... Okay. Right there, I believe that's them with Eileen. So Derek would be the older boy. See, once again, that's an odd description because he looks blonde. Maybe that's why I thought so. And David would be the younger boy. Okay, so now we have to get into theories. You guys knew we had to get into theories of who possibly killed them and why. And if it was just Eileen. So theory number 1 is she killed the boys because she didn't want them. This could be the reason why she kept Diane. Maybe she was afraid to raise boys. Maybe she'd already been doing it for a few years at this point in time, but maybe they were becoming too much of a handful. 3 kids was too much of a burden. She had no money. She didn't even have enough money to raise 1 kid, let alone 3. So maybe it was just easier for her to get rid of these boys. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because most people that kill their children will either wrap them in a blanket or in a coat as a sign of compassion. I don't think she necessarily wanted to do this. However, that can't be discounted. Maybe that was just one of the things. It could have been the reason why she lied to everybody and said the boys went into care. Of course, she doesn't want to tell people. It could also be the reason why she never wanted to talk about it because it didn't matter to her. I'm not sure. I mean, it makes me wonder why she didn't get rid of all the kids unless she favored her daughter, or once again, her daughter was older. You know, maybe she thought a 10-year-old, it would be harder to take down. I'm not sure. Number 2, they were killed by their mother, and this is the most believed theory, they were killed by their mother due to their poverty level. She could not afford to have them. She didn't necessarily want to put them into care because they were still a part of her. Maybe somehow in her mind, it made sense that if she killed them, they would not have to go through a life of suffering like she and Diane were. I mean, they were 6 and 7, guys. However, there is some indication that their ages would indicate that as well. She didn't kill them as newborns. She didn't kill them as toddlers. She killed them as a 6 and 7-year-old boys. And this would be after the war. She more than likely had a job during the war and she could provide for all her kids, or at least try to give them some semblance of survival. Maybe in 1947, when the soldiers were coming home, 1946, 1947, it became too hard for her to do this, and she did away with her 2 sons. Apparently, guys, this is wasn't an uncommon occurrence at that point in time in Vancouver. As you know, Vancouver was very violent at that point in time. Some could argue it still is today. And a lot of the violence was centered toward women, particularly lower class women. Maybe she was in an abusive relationship at that point in time, and he was abusive to the kids, and she thought this was the best way to save them. Most of the time, though, when this occurs, the mother will also commit suicide. And we know that Diane didn't do that. She died in 1996 at the age of 78. So that throws people off a little bit. Why did she continue to carry on if her children were dead? However, she still did have Diane. It's very strange. I wonder why she would keep Diane, unless it was easier for her to kill the two boys because they were so small. I'm not sure, guys. And at that point in time, it would have been hard for her to get a job, right? There wouldn't really be high paying jobs. I don't think she was particularly educated. There was a lot of racism during that point in time too, particularly toward people of Indigenous heritage. She was Métis. That could have been part of it. The best job she would have to look forward to would be waitressing, a domestic servant, maybe taking in washing for people, maybe cooking for people, things of that nature. It just wasn't enough for her to be able to support children. I don't think she necessarily just killed the boys so she could go out and party. Yes, it does seem like she may have at times been wild, but Diane never described her as an uncaring woman. In fact, she was anti-violence. So I'm not sure, guys. Number 3, she and someone else killed the boys. Like I mentioned earlier, guys, it's very strange to me that she was able to kill a 6 and a 7-year-old with no problems. That nobody heard them screaming, although this might be a more isolated place where it was easier for her too. How did no one hear the one boy scream as his brother was being murdered? She couldn't have done them both in at the same time. She would have needed 2 hatchets for that. She only had the one. Who did the hatchet belong to anyway? She wasn't a roofer. A woman wouldn't have been at that point in time. And she was not working in the interior of the homes. It would seem that now the hatchet could have been left by a former boyfriend or lover or a family member. Regardless, how did she get the hatchet? How did she subdue those 2 boys into getting them to do, into letting them kill her, into letting her kill them? Let's just say, how was she able to kill both boys without anybody hearing or knowing? It would have been easier if there had been 2 people, particularly if one was a man, because he maybe hit their heads together. They passed out. Now, she could have done that too. And of course, when they were passed out, they hacked them with the hatchet. How is that possible, though? It's very strange. Nothing else was left that indicated anybody masculine. For all we know, they could have been strangled first and then hit with the hatchet many times, for all we know. Jumble of bones, guys. I'm not sure. But it does seem that she could have had help, particularly in hiding this from people for so long. Also, they made mention several times of the fact that she had a relative, whoever it may have been, that lived at the entrance to Stanley Park. Did this relative help her do it? This relative would have known Stanley Park probably better than Eileen did, would have known about the more isolated areas, the ones that are lesser visited. Is it possible she had help from A, a family member who also kept her secret, or B, a man? Was she forced to do this? Was she, like I said before, in an abusive relationship and the man maybe took a liking to Diane because she was female or didn't see her as a threat, but because her sons belonged to 2 different fathers, there's a lot of people that do those, guys, decided that they had to go. Maybe he didn't like the attention that she was giving her children or her sons at that point in time because they were younger. So he talked her into or threatened her into killing them, or at least being present while they were dead. Was she in some type of relationship like that? Did she kill these boys to get them away from the abuse? Or was she forced to stand there and watch? That could be another indication why she laid her coat down over them too. She didn't want this to happen, but who can say for sure? Number 4 is a theory that I don't think a lot of people looked into or are aware of. But is it possible that Diane gave her kids to a family member while she was going out and looking for a job, or she sent the boys to a family member? It's possible. I mean, it's 1947. Maybe it was possible that Diane looked a little bit older so she could help her mother find work. Maybe she had other avenues for work. I don't know. Is it possible that she was unable to take care of her 2 sons, so she gave them to a family member just to look after until she got on her feet? Maybe she had to go elsewhere to look for work. Maybe they couldn't take all 3 of the kids. Regardless, is it possible this family member, maybe the one that lived at the entrance to Stanley Park, is it possible that the family member, if she did this, was a violent person? Maybe they had too many children of their own and it was too much of a burden to take on these 2 boys, even though they did. Maybe one didn't agree with the other one taking them on. I don't know. Is it possible that the 2 boys were killed by a family member and that family member then told Eileen when she came back looking for them? Remember, she's nonviolent, even though killing your own sons and going through the trauma of that, or watching somebody kill your sons, could make you very nonviolent. But regardless, is it possible that they then told her the boys were too much, so they put them into care, or else they were adopted out? Of course, she would never report them missing because she's told that they were put into care. It doesn't negate the fact that it doesn't seem like she ever looked for them. However, maybe because they were so poor, maybe she couldn't get a job or whatever, and she felt it was better for them. This could be indicative of why there's no care report, that an actual family member killed the boys, not Eileen, and she didn't know. Is that possible? I don't know. I mean, if it's the family member that lives at the entrance to Stanley Park, they'd know a lot about the area. So is it possible? Who can say for sure? What do you guys think? What theory makes the most sense to you? What do you think actually happened to these boys? What would be the reason that Eileen killed them? What do you guys think? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today. It's one of our shorter cases because I don't have as much information. Just let me know your thoughts down below, guys. I'd love to hear from you. And next week, like I said, we're either going to do a case that's kind of wrapped up in another infamous case, or we're going to do a revisitation of a case I've done. You guys will know next week. I could just decide to do something else. You guys know sometimes I do that. Anyway, I will see you later. I hope you guys all have a good week or next few days until I see you again, and I'll talk to you then. Bye for now, guys.